Alright, so um, so I'm going to answer this comment on emotions from one party relay. Says, hey David, could you say a bit more about how emotion appears for you these days compared to before? I've noticed my huge sense of resistance and the stress it triggers comes as a reaction to emotion rather than thought. I have techniques for dismantling thoughts, but the emotions still get really strong and destabilizing. I often don't know why I feel how I often don't know how why I feel what can only be described as grief emotions. Sometimes it appears as a deep empathy and compassion, but it completely overwhelms me, so it becomes distressing, and a huge sense of resistance comes. I don't know how much of it is thought, habit, and how much is the way my body naturally uses serotonin and other hormones. I admit that my desire to cure my depression, I only use this word because it's what doctors have labelled it, is what pushed me onto this path, and the desire is still very much there. So I would suggest that if something is overwhelming, if we feel that we can't handle something, then what we're resisting is a thought. It's not necessarily emotion or sensation, but it's something made in thought that represents that experience from a personal point of view, as the subject, as the one in the centre of the experience, relating to the experience of emotion as something separate from it that can relate to it, that can observe it as the owner of that experience. So why I make that statement with the thoughts and the problem being a reaction to a thought and not a reaction to sensation is basically the idea that we can't handle something, or the idea that we need to recall. So emotion essentially is sensation. It's a somewhat physical experience. It becomes quite difficult to, or for a while it's not clear what is emotion and what is thought, what is identity, i.e. thought, and what is emotion. That's not clear, because there's so much identification with the emotion that that identification essentially is relating to a thought with thought relating to itself, creating the illusion of subject-object, of me, the experiencer, the subject, and my emotion, my emotional experience, my emotional story. So it's basically, well, what I noticed is, if you're asking me about my experience, is that the sorry to laugh at this, but I just find it funny in retrospect that the idea that I can't handle this, the idea that I have to do something about this emotion, that I have to recall past experiences of emotion or project into the future and say, I can't handle these sensations, I can't handle these emotions. Or even when the emotion is happening now, the idea that I can't handle this, like, is there comes a point where it becomes obviously clear that that's all nonsense. Like, it's just all absolute nonsense. Um, it's just a story. It's just an interpretation, and that interpretation comes from the point of view of the one relating to my experience. But at no point ever has experience ever been too much. At no point ever during experience, immediately, is it ever too much. That it's not possible for that to be the case. It's just not possible. And that this might not make sense, that this is what it is. It's already this. It's already happening. It's not possible for experience to be too much, or to be too much in the future, or for me not to handle it. It's just not possible. It's clearly absurd. And but what makes that story believable is relating to what we think is experience directly, but is actually a thought framed in subject object, a thought framed as me and my experience, and then the story of my experience across a timeline. If we pay attention to what the thoughts are saying, and get closer and closer to the direct and immediate sensory experience, get closer to the emotion, it kind of starts to come into focus that what is an emotion, what is the sensation, and what is the thought saying about it. Give me 2 seconds. For some reason, it seems to be with certain emotions, certain sensations, maybe due to conditioning and past experience, the belief that there seems to be a stronger, more deeply held belief that I can't handle this. This emotion is wrong. It shouldn't be here. I need to fix it. I need to do something about it. And there's that urgency there. There's that aversion to experience as it comes up, and the aversion essentially seems to be at the deepest level. It's a movement away from experience, a separation from direct experience, apparently into a position separate from it, apparently into time, into past and future, and why that seems to happen is it's an attempt to control the sensation, to control for the sensation, to try and control whether I'm going to feel this or not, to try and control for in the future. I don't want to feel this again because it's not comfortable, I feel like I can't handle it. Or in the present moment, how to get rid of this unpleasant emotion that I don't like, I feel I can't handle, I feel shouldn't be here. Strangely enough, that movement away from direct experience, that separation into a position separate from experience, an ownership position separate from my emotion as the subject, is what makes it uncomfortable. The illusion that it can be controlled in any way is what makes it uncomfortable, because it can't be controlled, it can't be managed. It's just not possible to do that. I mean, for that to be possible, there would need to be a me in control, and there would need to be a linear time narrative. Um, the emotion, the sensation itself doesn't exist in time, doesn't exist in subject object, the direct sensation. And the more clear that is, the more the sensation, the non-dual nature of the sensation comes to the forefront of experience, and that sensation um, becomes the more primary aspect of experience compared to the narratives about it, compared to that movement back from it, from experience, that separation from the sensation, and attempt to understand and control it from a distance. Then the distinction, you could say, between the fiction, the illusion, the story, and the sensation kind of comes into contrast, and in that it becomes clear that there is no problem in the sensation ever. There is no problem in the emotion ever. It's not possible that I can't handle this. It's not possible that this is ever going to be too much for me to handle. It when that really clarifies, that whole movement back from experience, movement back from sensation, kind of stops happening. And when that stops happening, that discomfort, that relating to my experience from a subjective position, and then making a problem of it, suggesting or feeling, believing deeply that this isn't the right experience, this is wrong, this emotion shouldn't be here, and I have to do something about it. I have to understand, control, and fix it. That stops happening. So then all there is the sensation, the emotion, and it turns out that the sensation, the emotion, is completely fine. There isn't a problem in it. The problem was the illusion that I had to do something about it, that that I had to fix or control it, that it shouldn't be there. And it's weirdly, right, it seems to contextualizing that non-dual experience of sensation into a time narrative. This is a model, right? That the infinite nature of that sensation almost doesn't fit into this fake narrative about it. That's why the person can't seem to handle it, because the person doesn't even exist separate from it. So that sensation, that emotion, from a small personal position across a timeline, it doesn't fit in there. It's too free to be captured by that, and that seems to be what creates this resistance. Trying to relate to something incomprehensible, trying to fit the infinite wisdom within that emotion into a personal narrative, it doesn't work. It's you know, the separate self can't contain, I mean, it's not even a real thing, but it can't contain the paradoxical and infinite wisdom of the universe, which is manifesting as that sensation directly in experience in a non-dual way. It can't, you can't fit that into a fiction, so that's why it appears so uncomfortable. But strangely, it also it seems to it's like trying to capture something natural into something unnatural, so to speak. It doesn't work, and after a while, it just gets so not right, so uncomfortable, that you have to let go of the unnatural thing and just embrace nature, embrace what is here directly, and in that, all the problems eventually aren't there anymore, because the problems are generated, the problems are made up. They refer to this sensation But in the sensation itself, there is no problem. There is no story. There's no. It's not possible that you can't handle it. There's no one that can't handle it. Um, there's just the sensation. It's a story about it. That subtle movement away from it to try and protect what feels like me from that experience that makes the problem. Without that, it's not problematic. But that movement back from experience, it seems to have this strange effect where it like traps or sticks, it seems, emotion into a kind of a lasting thing, a persisting experience, some quality that is owned by me, the self, and that is my quality, and it follows me about, and in my story and relating to things that really that never happens, but it kind of it feels like that, and it has some strange effect where it kind of holds on to um, emotion that's kind of like congealed through time into like a lasting quality, like an underlying background experience that never actually happens, because you remember I said that the illusion of self plugs the gaps and makes it seem like it's always here. It's always this constantly here separate entity is always here. It's not always here, but the thought makes it look like that. It seems to do that with emotion. It plugs the gaps and it owns these qualities of experience and puts them into a strange narrative, and it gets really uncomfortable because that's not actually happening, and whatever we are kind of can sense that, and it just seems not right after a while. Um, but in dropping into the physical, visceral experience of emotion, sensation, as directly as possible, seems to unstick what seems to be stuck. Um, just like with thought, this solid experience of a self lasting through time, it seems like a real thing when we look at thought, really. We see it's transient, it comes and goes, it's not there all the time. Then that illusion becomes not something so solid, but something like ethereal and transparent, not here all the time. As that identity goes, like you're describing, the emotional residue of that in emotion maintains the same quality, and it seems to take a while for that to dismantle itself in the same way as thought. And I think that's what you're describing there. Um, the thing about that is that certain parts of identity that are held deeply um, seems to operate through thought at a deeper level, so it's harder to spot that. It's more tied into like survival, it seems, that visceral instinct of keeping this body alive. Um, so it can be difficult to spot the distinction between, you know, it's quite easy to see that the overt verbal narrative in the head is nonsense, but those deeper forms of thought seem to be quite mushed up with emotion and this illusion of continuity and personal quality of experience. And that seems to dismantle over time. And I, I could suggest how to do that is just to, when the when you notice the emotion, when the emotion appears in experience, drop straight into the physical and immediate sensation of that indirect experience, and then just open up to it, just allow it to be here, and then watch for this movement back from it to relate to it, the movement back from the experience as the something here or wherever separate from it, that wants to avert from it, that wants to relate to it as something separate. And in that there will be doubt, there will be urgency, there will be like a need to control it, a need to get rid of it or do something about it. But then if we go to the sensation, just keep going to the sensation, keep going to the emotion, eventually it starts to clarify that really nothing can be done about it and nothing has to be done about it. I mean, it's already here, it's already happening, it's already happened by the time that thought illusion starts relating to it. It's already happened, it's following along after. So going more and more directly to the physical, visceral, or however you'd like to describe it, energetic experience directly of just the sensation of emotion, and staying with that as much as possible. When we stay with that, we start to notice this tendency to pull back from experience, and the mind might go a bit crazy at times. It might bring up some. For me, it brought up some strange thoughts at this point, and the thoughts became very, not relative to me and my life, but like existential, more like philosophical, I guess you could say. And those kind of thoughts weren't obvious narratives, like they weren't me talking along in my head or whatever, or pictures or stuff, but it was certainly a thought, but it was an attempt to understand experience, an attempt to understand sensation, and it just wasn't clear that was a thought for a while, because it's not so obvious. But when it does become clear that that's a thought, again it loses its power, and it's not so scary anymore, because it's the thought that we are resisting, it's not the sensation. So when we see that it's a thought, it loses its power. So then the sensation heightens itself in its vividness and its intensity even more, because we don't have this weird thing obscuring it. And it turns out the sensation is deeply peaceful inherently as it is, even if it's intense. So that kind of gets rid of the need to avert from experience, the need to control or manage the emotion. I also noticed that there are certain repetitive thoughts that are triggered by certain sensation emotions. So it's like part of the identity has like anchored itself onto certain sensations when they're, say, noticed or recognized in experience. Even just noticing that, or even just having that become clear, starts to untangle that in itself anyway. But it can be tempting to adopt a position and think I have to do something about it, I have to go and fix that. But weirdly, it's that whole thing is what the problem is in the first place. It's more surrendering to just the sensation, and you could say being attentive and curious as to what is a thought and what is sensation. Like what of this experience is actually here, and what of this experience is being subtly framed into identity and narrative. But I know it's another, and again, like I pick things out of this, and I can see that you're essentially you're answering your own question. I'm just maybe elaborating on what you've told me with my own experience. But you see, you've noticed a huge sense of resistance. As a reaction to emotion rather than thought, I would just ask, is it emotion you're reacting to? Or is it a thought? Is it a thought interpretation of what that emotion means for me? What it is, what it's doing here, why it's here? Should it be here? Should it be not? And you said the techniques for dismantling thoughts, but the emotions still get really strong and destabilizing. I would suggest that if that's the case, then what we're looking at now isn't it would be helpful to come more directly into contact with, to the point of no distance with, the sensation, with the emotion, and then see what deeper levels of narrative, of thought are there, framing this in a way, making it seem that I'm separate from this experience, I have to do something about it. And the grief thing, I don't know if I can relate to what you're saying and what I was talking about, saying the thoughts became existential, and at that level, it wasn't so clear what was a thought and what was a sensation, an emotion, and it took a while for that to separate, for that to kind of work itself out. When it does, it's clear because there's no problem in the emotion, there's no problem in the sensation, and it's transient, it's not a lasting quality, it comes and it goes, it's ephemeral, it appears and disappears. It's as transient as the coming and going of thoughts, the coming and going of apparent sights, apparent objects in this visual field of sounds. It's all impermanent, transient, ephemeral. The lasting quality thing, the always here-ness of this quality of experience, I would suggest is a thought. Anything that feels like that is a thought. Really, emotion, just, if we really pay attention to the direct experience, it's not in time. You can't frame it in time, really. It's timeless, it's ever changing, it's transient, it's constantly morphing, constantly moving, constantly changing. If that makes any sense, just like the thoughts. Yeah. So I would maybe suggest from my own experiences, get closer to the direct experience of emotion, the direct experience of sensation as that, and watch for how it's being framed from any sort of position relating to it, any sort of position separate from it, and maybe ask, what are the beliefs around this? What am I suggesting about the way it is or the way it should be? And is that really true? Can I just open myself up to this experience directly and let it be what it is? Not worry about how long it's going to last, or if it's going to go away, or what it means. Because all of that, honestly, all of that in the sensation is resolved, is all of that in the sensation is answered, in the emotion is answered. All the wisdom that's ever needed is in the physical experience of the emotion. It just moves naturally how it moves, and everything's in that. The wisdom of the whole universe is in that, and the wisdom of the whole universe is you. And when we take a position as something that's not that, we seem to limit our access to that wisdom. And it's a shame, because then all the problems start to appear. Then it becomes like, I can't handle it, I'm confused, I don't know what to do about it. But in the actual emotion, it's pure peace, pure certainty. It's complete. There's nothing missing in that, and there's nothing to do. So then you see that your capacity for experience as experience is absolutely infinite, is limitless, unlimited. It's when we adopt a small position within this as something separate from it, it becomes too big for us. It becomes like something I can't handle, something that's confusing. I don't know what to do about it. But I would say, like, what you've specified there and you've intuited already is that the uncertainty as to what is a thought and what is direct experience, what is a thought and what is emotion. So I would just keep looking into that. And it does go away, that tendency to move back from experience, to relate to experience as the me. When that goes away, it then doesn't matter what the sensation is, it then doesn't matter what the emotion is, because there's nothing that can handle it. So then sensation is free to be what it is, and it's not problematic. It's fundamentally peaceful, it's fundamentally okay. But there are certain parts, or let's say certain sensations that seem to be much more deeply have been much more deeply integrated into identity, and it can take a bit of time to separate them out, I think. For me, it was something like, if I was to put it into words, right, it was something like, it was about death, it was about non-existence, and it was like, what is this? I'm never going to understand this. What's the point of this? That's what the thought was saying. It wasn't saying it in words, but it suggested that, like, very efficiently, immediately, by framing from a position. And that position was just so uncomfortable, and it just didn't need to be there. The position didn't need to be there whatsoever. And when it's not there, who cares? You know, who cares? The answer has been answered. Experience is experience. It's that movement to relate, that movement to understand, essentially to control, that causes the problem. Anyway, hope that helps. Let me know, and I'll talk to you next time.